Hey everybody, my name is Kati Morton and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And today I'm going to walk you through the 10 signs of quiet borderline personality disorder, otherwise known as BPD, and 6 ways that we can better manage it. And if you like videos like this, make sure you like and subscribe. It really does help. But let's jump into today's topic. When people talk about BPD, they often talk about the outward expressions of it. Things like us being impulsive or difficulties in relationships. We can get really upset easily, we can lash out, we can pick fights, we can also self-injure and just do a lot of things that people can see in outward expressions. When people talk about BPD, they often talk about the outward expressions of it. These can be things like us being really impulsive, splitting behavior, which means that we can see people as all good or all bad. We can also lash out and be really emotionally volatile. That's what a lot of people reference. However, what most people don't talk about are the quiet symptoms of BPD. These can be things like self-injurious behavior, deep depression, struggle with self-worth. And that is what we're going to talk about today, the more quiet signs of BPD. And before we get started today, just know that we are building a studio outside of our house. And so if you hear some nail gunning and compressors going, that's because the building is happening. It's very exciting, but it's also incredibly noisy. Okay, with that, let's jump into the 10 signs of quiet borderline. And the first, referencing my notes, is feeling empty, alone, or numb a lot of the time. And that kind of disconnection between what I call like our brain and body. That numbness means that even if we are experiencing things in life, we're completely cut off. And in my experience with patients with BPD, this cutoff happens because we feel so much so intensely. One of my favorite ways to describe BPD is as us being emotional burn victims. Meaning, like if you think of a burn, any slight touch, oh, it hurts, right? And it sends through all our nerves. And think of that when it comes to emotions, that any slight, any upset, any pain that someone could cause us emotionally or that we experience is felt maybe 10 times what a normal person feels. And so we numb out, we disconnect because, frankly, it feels better and a lot safer. Okay? Number 2. And sign number 2 is we can feel like we don't exist or like we don't really know who we are. And I think a lot of that can come from this disconnection or this numb out. But if we think about it, when we struggle with borderline personality disorder, we fear abandonment so intensely that we can people please, we can do a lot of other things to ensure people are around us and that they're there all the time. And that kind of behavior can mean that we're looking outward for a lot of our needs and not looking inward. So we might not really know who we are. We might not have taken the time to get to know ourselves or to connect with what's really going on. And also you can see this connection with dissociation. I know a lot of my patients with BPD also dissociate. And if we are removed from our reality, at least a little bit, right, to protect us from what's happening, we can struggle to feel like we exist because, frankly, we're kind of pulled out of it. This video is sponsored by Fabulous, the #1 self-care app to help you better build habits and achieve your goals. It's based on behavioral science and breaks down science-backed daily routines into smaller steps so that they are achievable and, most importantly, something that we can stick to. It helps you learn to create rituals that help propel you toward your goals and participate in challenges that will build motivation and awareness along the way. From the start, I love the letters from future Kati telling me that I had already made some positive change. It kind of stopped my mind from jumping right into that negative thought spiral, like you can't do this, it's not going to work out. And it kind of reminds me of this therapy style called solution-focused therapy, which I have always enjoyed. You can pick from among more than 100 recommended habits already in the app, or you can create your own. And I love that I can set reminders, so it makes creating these new habits so much easier. Like the first of the foundation habits is to get me to drink water first thing in the morning. And to make that uncomplicated, the app reminds me to put water by my bed when I go to sleep, so it's right there when I wake up. I found that the app helped a lot with my overall well-being too, because in addition to helping me form some new healthier habits, it also helps with wellness goals throughout the journey section. There were letters that I could read that made me consider my choices and goals. And then it would ask me to commit to one positive action that week. Overall, it's been incredibly helpful and motivating. It's great to see my progress and to be reminded to stick with my new healthier routine. Use the Fabulous app to start building your ideal daily routine. The first 100 people who click on the link will get 25% off of a Fabulous subscription. The third sign of quiet borderline is passive-aggressive behavior. If you're wondering what this can look like, this can be like me running late so that then you're running late to get to that appointment or to get to the airport or something like that. Maybe it's a subtle dig, what I call like a complisult, which is like a compliment that wraps over an insult that's saying like, oh, you look so nice today, way better than yesterday. And you're like, I'm complimented, but I'm also offended simultaneously. Or I can say, I'm fine, like when I'm not. That could be passive-aggressive behavior. We could also, referencing my notes, be sarcastic. Oh, purposeful ignorance. This is one that I think is really important to remember, is when someone pretends that they don't know how to do something or that they don't remember, as a way of kind of making you feel, it's almost like gaslighting. Like, oh, I don't think that's how it happened. I just don't remember. And that's kind of done as a way to invalidate your experience. Or I don't know how to run the vacuum, let's say, so then you do all the housekeeping. There can be a lot of these passive-aggressive ways that we interact when we struggle with quiet borderline. Okay. Sign number 4 is turning our anger inward. So it's like I'm trying to tell you that I'm upset without actually telling you. And all of these subtle signs that I give off aren't actual clear communication. And this is just another passive way that we can tell people that we're upset without really telling them. Sign number 5, impulsive behaviors. And this is very common, honestly, with all of my patients with BPD, but these are things like shopping, like overspending. We can engage in risky sexual behaviors, use illicit drugs, we can self-injure, we can binge eat. There can be a lot of different things that we can do impulsively. And impulsive really just means that we're not giving it any thought or really time to make a decision. We're just acting quickly. I think all of my patients who've had BPD over the years would agree that they have engaged at one time or another in these impulsive acts. Sign number 6 is that we have an intense fear of rejection. And when we have this intense of a fear, we can act out like a people pleaser, right? We can fawn all over people, doing things to ensure that they're happy, really, so that they don't leave us. And I've talked about this before, but often we think of people pleasing as a way of being really nice to everybody else. And there is that component to it. However, it's actually a manipulation tactic. We please others as a way to soothe our own system. And that goes for those of us with quiet borderline, right? We are so worried that people are going to reject us or abandon us that we do everything in our power to make sure that they stay around and that they're happy and we don't have any conflict. Sign number 7 is we can struggle with isolation. Often when we're so worried that people are going to leave us, reject us, abandon us, we can feel that it's safer to just be alone. Also, if we have a lot of emotional reactivity, right, and being around other people just makes our self-worth, go farther down, or we can feel like maybe I don't even really exist on a deeper level, it can kind of like exacerbate our BPD symptoms. We're not going to want to be around people. We're not going to want to put ourselves in situations that will only make us feel worse. And so we can think being isolated is the only way to be safe and to feel okay. Sign number 8 is splitting behavior. And I've talked about this a little bit, but splitting is when people are all good or all bad. And because those of us with BPD are emotional burn victims, that's the way I like to describe it, meaning that any small slight that can happen to us, we feel it very intensely, and then we can react out of it, right? And those other symptoms I was talking about, like impulsive behavior. So what splitting is when someone in our life we think is amazing, perfect, and good, and they're like our bestest best friend, and then maybe they just don't show up for us one time or don't return our calls because they're busy, but we feel that deeply and it's very painful. And so instead of acknowledging that, hey, maybe that person just isn't as perfect or doesn't love us unconditionally, I don't know. Instead of doing that, we say they're just bad, we can't trust them, they might abandon us or reject us, and we think they're all bad and they're cut off. Or we can pick a fight with them and cut them off. And so my patients with quiet borderline don't lash out at people so much, but they are very good at ghosting and just completely disappearing from people's lives and disconnecting without any communication. So if you find yourself doing that, where something small might happen, like they didn't text back after a couple of days, or they didn't get back to you about that thing, or they had to change plans last minute and you want to completely cut them off, just take notice of that and think, is this helpful for me, or could this be part of my quiet borderline? Okay. Even if things are going good for us and we feel like we're moving forward in our career or with our relationships, we can start to second guess ourselves and think, I'm not really worth it. And that, like, not feeling like we don't have a good sense of self. We can feel like we don't exist, right? We can kind of spiral out and think, this isn't even working, and I'm not even good enough for this, and I'm not deserving of this. And instead of allowing ourselves to be happy and have things move forward, we can act in ways that can be detrimental to us down the line. These could be things like, dragging our feet in a project at work, or maybe picking a fight with our supervisor at the office, or doing things in our relationships that will hurt us later, or maybe not showing up for someone. There can be a lot of different ways we can sabotage, but the thing that's important to remember about this is that we may or may not know that we're doing this. Sometimes we don't have an awareness of this sabotaging behavior. So when you start to maybe feel not so bad, not great, but not so bad, maybe just pay a little extra attention to the ways that you're acting in your relationships or things that are working you towards your goals to ensure that we don't engage in any of this. Just take notice of that and think, is this helpful for me, or could this be part of my quiet borderline? Okay. And finally, sign number 10 is hypervigilance. Since BPD is most often caused from trauma and PTSD, we can feel very cued up and on edge. And any loud noise it can trigger a panic attack or send us into a dissociative episode. We can just always feel very overwhelmed and on edge, and any small thing can just set us off. So pay attention to how reactive you are to your environment and how cued up you feel. And one little tip I'll give you is, if you feel this way often, doing a full body shake when we start to feel it build can give our nervous system the release that it so desperately needs. I hope those signs and symptoms were helpful, because quiet BPD is really often misdiagnosed or missed altogether. I've had many of you tell me you're misdiagnosed as having bipolar disorder or major depressive disorder, and they've completely missed the other signs and symptoms that you experience because, like I said, they're more internal instead of outward based. And so our therapists, our psychiatrists, psychologists might have missed them. And so I think it's really important that we share in this information, and share in the comments if you have any other signs and symptoms you think that I missed, because it's really important that we all learn together. And with that, let's jump into 6 ways that we can better manage it. My first tip, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And essentially the goal of this is to notice those thoughts. If you're having self-sabotaging thoughts or thoughts about your self-worth that aren't positive, pay attention. Stop the shit talking. Sometimes we just have to recognize that it's happening, and instead of thinking that we have to make it positive, that's like that toxic positivity thing that's been going around online, like, just think it's good and it will be. No, that's not how it works. But we can pay attention to these negative thoughts and work to make them more neutral. It sounds silly and it doesn't sound as positive. Like, let's say this negative thought is, no one's ever gonna love me, I'm not good enough. Instead of trying to think everybody loves me and I'm amazing, a neutral thought would be, I'm open to the belief that I could feel better about myself. Now, I know that that doesn't feel a huge, it's not hugely positive. It might not feel like a huge shift, but trust me when I tell you that paying attention to our thoughts and working them into a more neutral place will completely change your life and help out with a lot of that negative self-image and talk that happens with quiet borderline. My second tip is dialectical behavior therapy, otherwise known as DBT. And I took some notes because I broke down the modules of DBT. If for those of you who aren't familiar, DBT runs along and you move through modules as you work on your mindfulness, then into distress tolerance, like how can I manage upsets in my life? And then we work on some emotion regulation skills. And then finally, interpersonal effectiveness, which means working on my relationships so I can better communicate and feel more understood. So those are the modules of DBT, but I broke them into the first 2, the mindfulness and distress tolerance, are more acceptance modules. So if you find some of the things you're struggling with most is acceptance of yourself or acknowledgement of what you're feeling, those are going to be the modules you're going to want to focus on. And then the second component, the emotion regulation and the interpersonal effectiveness, are more change-based modules, meaning now I want to go out into my life and improve my relationships, right? Or find ways to better regulate my emotions in the moment. So overall, DBT is incredibly helpful for BPD. It was actually created by Marsha Linehan, who herself has BPD, and just found that there was no real therapy that was helpful for people who felt so dysregulated and always feared, had this intense fear of abandonment. And so I cannot encourage you to look into a DBT-based therapist in your area. It's truly life-changing. My third tip, be more mindful of your emotions and how you feel. I often personally will struggle to identify my emotions, but I can tell you what my body's telling me because I can experience it that way. That's easier for me. It might not be for you, but getting to know yourself, right? If I'm feeling super stressed out, I might be more spacey. I don't sleep as well. My hunger fullness is off, right? There's certain things that I know personally I'm going to feel, and I can recognize it earlier so that I can intervene with some helpful things earlier. And so take some time to get to know yourself and how you experience life so that you can take care of yourself before we maybe lash out at a loved one. And a great acronym from DBT is called HALT, and it stands for hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Check in on those things, because if we're not taking care of our basic needs, we are much more vulnerable to our emotional outbursts and upsets. Tip number 4 is to build a healthy support team. This could be friends and family, therapists, psychiatrists, whoever is helpful around you. It can be really beneficial to have other people to fact check with. When we feel things so intensely, it can be helpful to talk to someone and say, hey, did you think that person was being extra rude? And they can say yes or no. And that can give us a little bit of a breather before we maybe act impulsively. And having people to check in on us and make sure we're not isolating, overall, having a support system is incredibly beneficial. My 5th tip, use impulse logs. I have impulse logs. I think they're on page 190 of my traumatized book. I might be wrong, but they're in there. And what an impulse log is it has you write down what it is you're wanting to do. What's that impulse that you feel? Then it has you express what's going on, what's happening around me. Then the next is kind of like, these are like columns I'm working through. So the third thing would be, what are some emotions that I'm experiencing, or what is it that I actually want to express? Then we have to come up with some other things that we could do alternatively. And then we usually wait, like I have my patients after they've done the impulse log, I want them to wait 30 minutes, and then I give them permission to do whatever they want. Because the thing about impulses is if we don't act on them within, honestly, for most people, within 30 minutes to an hour, the impulse is gone. Not always. This isn't 100% of the time, but most often that's the case. So if we can just build something into that time, an impulse log, and we wait, we use some distraction techniques and things, we can prevent ourselves from acting in ways that we really don't want to. So I cannot recommend impulse logs enough. And my final tip, tip number 6, is what's called playing it out. Now, this is a CBT tool, and playing it out means run me through, or run yourself through, what the worst case scenario would be. That's usually easy because we've already gone there. So tell me about it. What would it look like? What would be that worst case that could play out in this situation? Then, what would be the best case scenario? Tell me if the world always, everything always went in your favor and everything just happened just in the right time. What would that look like? And then finally, what is the most likely scenario? And I find doing this practice of best case, worst case, most likely calms us down, helps us see pretty much all the options out there, and forces us at the end to focus on what's most likely to happen. And that can sometimes assuage any of those, impulses, urges, or self-deprecating thoughts. I hope that was helpful. Like I said earlier, do you have any other signs or symptoms of quiet BPD that you wish I had included? Leave those in the comments. Or are there any other ways that you best manage your symptoms? Please share, because it's with my expertise and your experience that we work together towards a healthy mind and a healthy body. And I'll see you next time.